It's the Unscripted Ohio podcast for Friday, September the 7th. Can Rutgers give Ohio State all they can handle on Saturday? We'll ask Richie Schneiderite, the publisher of the Knight Report, for his perspective on the Scarlet Knights. Also, Zach Barnett of College Football Scoop and NBC's College Football Talk will answer the question, is Tom Herman in trouble down in Austin? And what should Alabama do with their quarterback situation? All coming up next on the Unscripted Ohio podcast.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. Football coming up on Saturday, and I am excited. It is take number 2 for the Buckeyes in the 2018 season. 77-31 over Oregon State in week number 1. Week number 2 coming up. Rutgers should offer just a tad bit more resistance, perhaps, than the Beavers did last week. We're going to get into all of that today. I've got Richie Schneiderite, publisher of the KnightReport.net, coming up here in a few minutes. He will preview Rutgers from the Scarlet Knight perspective. He'll tell us about a very experienced defense and somewhat talented defense that maybe could offer a little bit of resistance on the Ohio State offense, certainly more than Oregon State did. I've also got Zach Barnett of Football Scoop and NBC's College Football Talk. We'll get into the Buckeyes, what he thought of the Big Ten in week number 1. We'll talk about Alabama's quarterback situation. We'll get into all the drama going on down at the University of Texas. Is Tom Herman on the hot seat? What do they think of Herman's performance down in the state of Texas? And we'll talk a little bit about Clemson, a big showdown they've got going at Texas A&M on Saturday. So we'll get into all that with Zach coming up here later on in the show as well. So Ohio State and Rutgers on Saturday. Now, we've talked a little bit about Ohio State, Oregon State. I talked about it on the Monday show. We broke it down with Ross, what went wrong, what went right. And look, the offense was nearly flawless. It was nearly impeccable. There are a lot of concerns from people because the defense gave up 31 points, almost 400 yards to Oregon State. Now, I know this kind of brought back some visions of breakdowns, and a lot went wrong last year with the linebackers and pass coverage. The corners, I thought, got a lot better as the season went on. They were struggling in the early going. The corners were actually really good by season's end. Kendall Sheffield had improved. David Arnett had improved. I thought Arnett and Sheffield both did really well on Saturday. They weren't attacked very often. Oregon State really didn't try to go downfield. Most of the success the Beavers had was just the short and intermediate passing. They had a couple big screen passes, go for long gains, and then a couple crossing routes over the middle that Ohio State did not defend. The interesting thing about this is it really came down to a couple people in the Ohio State secondary were the main culprits when it came to the bigger plays. And I'm talking about Isaiah Pryor. I'm talking about Jason Wint. Pete Warner gave up a couple on the outer edge. Looking at the Pro Football Focus stats, it's really interesting because those three were the biggest violators when it came to giving up big plays on Saturday. Now, I know a couple of those screen passes, it's not just the linebackers. The linebackers have to come up and fill. They have to recognize the screen. But there is a duty also for the defensive line to be in position. You've got to recognize the coverage against you. If you know that you're getting upfield a little too easily and the tackle or the guard or any offensive lineman that's blocking you is not giving you enough resistance for you to get upfield, you've got to be able to sense that and understand that's a screen pass. So some of those screens are not just on the linebackers or corners or safeties to come up and fill, but it's also a responsibility of the defensive lineman to hold their ground, to get back and try to bust up the passing lanes and running lanes for those screen passes. So it's not just on the linebackers in those situations. It's also on the defensive line. One of those big runs, Chase Young was out of position where he should have been, been able to bounce that play back to the inside, and maybe it wouldn't have gone for a touchdown had he done that. Chase Young had his issues on Saturday, a couple offsides penalties. But here's where I'm going with this. Chase Young is going to be a monster, and I've got a stat here that I'm going to tell you that is going to prove it. If you didn't already know it from watching Chase Young on Saturday, I've got a stat that's going to blow your mind. But Chase Young is going to be fine. Ohio State as a defense, I think the more I think about this, the more I watch the game. I watched the game a second time this week because I wanted to digest some of the nuances of what happened with Ohio State. First of all, one of those touchdowns, one of those long 80-yard touchdowns they had, or 78-yard or whatever it was, came against the second-team defense. So the first-team defense did not give up all of those yards and all of those chunk plays. But when you put Tough Borland back in the middle full-time, because I think Baron Browning really struggled instinctively, he's still catching on. I don't think he's ready. But you put Tough Borland back, you put Jordan Fuller back in the back end, and maybe Marcus Hooker. There's some reports that Sean Wade could be moving to safety. Whatever Ohio State does, I think with some of these personnel fortifications that are coming in the next few weeks, I think the defense is going to improve drastically just from the personnel changes. But I also think the consistency will get better, and really all it was about 6 or 7 chunk plays out of about 60 plays run by Oregon State. Ohio State was very good on a good 50 to 55 plays, but it's really those 4 to 7 big plays that they've got to eliminate. I think that's going to happen when Fuller gets back, when Tough Borland takes over at inside linebacker. Malik Harrison and Pete Werner, I think, are going to be good. Pete Werner struggled a little bit in coverage. He got picked on a few times. But I think those two on the outside are going to be fine. You put Tough Borland in the middle and Jordan Fuller in the back end. I think this Ohio State defense is going to be just fine. Now, they've got the benefit on Saturday of facing a Rutgers offense that is being led by a true freshman quarterback, Artur Sikowski. I'm sorry, that's a tongue twister for me. Now, he is a heralded 4-star kid, but he threw 3 interceptions against Texas State. This Rutgers offense is not going to be very good. I think Ohio State's defense is going to get well and get well soon. If you're a Seinfeld fan like me, you're probably thinking of the episode where Elaine there's all those birthday celebrations and all those cakes and everything at her work, and she has that little saying, get well soon, we want you to get well. Well, I think Ohio State's defense is going to get well very soon. I think this Rutgers offense has a long way to go. Their defense is going to be tough. We'll talk about that with Richie here in a few minutes. We'll get his perspective on the Rutgers offense and the Rutgers defense. A very experienced defense. I think that defense is going to be tough, despite the fact that Ohio State has scored a ton of points in the first 4 meetings against Rutgers since they joined the Big Ten. It's not going to be necessarily as easy as it was last week, but I think the defense is going to hunker down and play very well on Saturday. Chase Young. So I want to get back to this because I teased it a minute ago. So Pro Football Focus put out an interesting stat. They showed the number of hurries by all defensive players in the country in week number 1 in college football. And the number 1 player in the country, actually there were 3 that were tied for first, but one that you would recognize is Chase Winovich, defensive lineman for Michigan. And Winovich had 10 rushes on 26 pass snaps in week number 1. Now, for context, Nick Bosa had 4 pass rushes on 23 snaps. That's a kind of a subpar game for him. That's still really good for most players. But for Nick Bosa, that's actually a little bit of a weak performance for him. But he was still really, really good on Saturday. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he had, a couple fumbles. Of course, he had the touchdown. One of those fumble recoveries was for a touchdown. Had a couple sacks. Nick Bosa was very, very good on Saturday. But despite having 4 pass rushes and 23 snap counts against the pass, Winovich having 10 in 26. Chase Young was 4th in the country last week, 1 off of the national lead. He had 9 pass rushes in 18 snap counts against the pass. That means every other pass play, Chase Young had beat his man and pressured the quarterback and was in the backfield. Folks, this guy is scary. I was going to say he's going to be scary, but he already is scary. He drew rave reviews as a freshman. Kind of reminds people a little bit of, physically, of Jadeveon Clowney, former number 1 pick. Clowney, a little bit taller. Clowney's more like 6'7", 6'6", 6'7", whereas Chase Young, or actually Clowney's probably in the 6'5", 6'6" range, whereas Chase Young is kind of in the 6'3" range. So he's a little bit taller than Chase Young, but I think Young may actually be quicker, maybe more of an athletic freak than Clowney was. Clowney is just kind of a big physical specimen. He's quick, but I don't know that he has the quickness we see right now from Chase Young. There are some people that will tell you that Chase Young, I don't want to say overrated, maybe overhyped, maybe a little bit of a disappointment. Look, that's far from the truth. This guy is going to be a prolific pass rusher. I would say next year, but he already is a prolific pass rusher. When you're in the backfield, 9 of 18 pass snaps in week number 1 of your football season, you're already there. He's got a lot to learn. I think the offsides penalties were just a product of him being really amped up and really excited. He's still got to be a little more consistent with the tackling. Interestingly enough, his tackle grade actually was a respectable 73 grade for PFF. For context, Nick Bosa and Draymond Jones, who, by the way, their overall grades were both over 90 on Saturday, their tackling grades were in the 75, 76 range. So Chase Young, tackling-wise, is right there. Pass rushing, he's already there. He's just got to continue his development in the mental aspect of the game. He's got to read the quarterback and read the play a little better, and he's got to stay true to his assignments. If he does those things, he is going to be, and already is, an absolute monster on defense for Ohio State. So, Buckeyes, Rutgers on Saturday. I think Ohio State will be fine defensively. I think this is going to be a very good defense. There are some mistakes, there are some concerns that have to get corrected for Ohio State for them to be a championship-level defense. But I don't think for week number 1 it was as bad as it appears from the 31 points and 390-some yards surrendered to Oregon State. We'll see, though. But I want to get this perspective now, get the Rutgers perspective from Richie Schneiderite. He is the publisher of the Night Report. So let's start with Rutgers' first performance on this past Saturday against Texas State. It obviously a somewhat inferior opponent, but Rutgers came out of the gate looking fairly good defensively. Obviously a very senior-laden group on the defensive side of the ball. There's a lot of expectations. Talk about that first performance against the Bobcats in week 1.
Well, it was an interesting game. Rutgers has a new offensive coordinator again in John McNulty, as some people might remember. He was offensive coordinator back when Rutgers had Mike Teal, Ray Rice, Kenny Britt, the tandem that kind of led them to, I guess, revival of the program, if you want to say that. So having him back at the helm definitely helps. New quarterback. I think he's one of 3 true freshmen starting this year in Artur Sikowski. He's a special kid. He shows a lot of promise. He's going to make freshman mistakes, of course, which he did against Texas State. He threw a couple dumb interceptions. I think he had 3 on the day. But overall, the team looks a lot better. You could see the progress happening. Are they going to win the Big Ten? No, but are they going to show progress and put up a fight in every game? Yes. So.
Yeah, defensively, it's really interesting to see what Chris Ash has done the first 2 years. They basically, when he took over, that defense, I think, in efficiency was rated like 126 out of 130 teams. But the last 2 years, they've been sitting right around national average. And so far, this year going into the season, the projections have them potentially a top 20, top 30 defense. 7 seniors starting, another junior on top of that. I mean, a couple of really good corners, Bleshawn Austin and Isaiah Wharton. Talk about the defense and the expectations on that side of the ball.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of people, a lot of Rutgers fans actually complain about the defensive line depth, but so far the starters have provided exactly what they needed. Elorm Loomer, he's a new guy starting this year. He took over for former NFL draft pick Tomoko Ture. So far he's had a sack, 2 tackles for loss, a couple quarterback hurries, I think, if I recall correctly. And as far as the linebackers, like you said, it's kind of a senior-laden defense. Trevor Morris is coming off a 100-plus tackle season. I think he had 8 or 9 the other day. Then you got Deontay Roberts, who just recently was named captain once again for the second time in 2 years. He's a force in the middle. And then, like you said, the defensive backs. Bleshawn Austin is a flat-out stud. He's arguably one of the better corners in the conference. He had his first interception of the season last week. He's coming off an ACL injury from last season, but he looks 100%. He looks good to go. So,
you mentioned Sikowski and being a true freshman, throwing him into the fire. What are his strengths, his profile as a quarterback? What's his strengths and weaknesses?
I think the first thing you notice about Sikowski, just watching practice and all that, are his mechanics. Kid throws an accurate ball, throws a deep ball, he can hit all the targets, low, mid, high. All those levels, he hits them all. He's just a very impressive kid. The kid's very well spoken for a true freshman. You could tell that going to IMG Academy his senior year definitely helped him a lot. He, just like I said, that deep ball it's something else to watch him practice.
And the running backs, Rutgers appears to have a very deep core of running backs, very deep stable. Of course, there's Raheem Blackshears, the big play guy, and Jonathan Hillman, the grad transfer from Boston College, and a freshman who you guys like a lot, Isaiah Pacheco. Talk about these three, and specifically Pacheco, and he had a big first debut against Texas State, and where's he at in his development?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Blackshear, while he's considered a running back, the guy can do it all. He's lined up in the slot. He's lined up as running back. He'll go out wide sometimes, actually. The kid can do it all. He's very, very impressive. I think last week he had a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. He's not the biggest back in the world. I want to say he's listed at 5'9", maybe. He might be shorter than that. Of course, the numbers are never accurate and all that. But overall, the kid's very special. Then you have Jonathan Hillman, the experienced guy from Boston College. He's providing kind of a leadership role and showing the other guys what they have to do. He's done it before in the ACC. He's done it at the highest level. And then back to Pacheco, the freshman. He didn't play a lot of snaps, but when he got in the game, I think it was the late third quarter, early fourth. So I don't know if it was against the first-team Texas State defense or not. But the kid just runs scary. He's just a scary runner, to be honest with you. He'll run downhill. He'll give you a couple juke moves here and there, and he's going to be a threat, I think, this year.
How much playing time do you see him getting? You mentioned he didn't really come in until the second half against Texas State. Are they just kind of monitoring to see how he does? Are they going to throw him into the wolves, you think? Where's he at in his progress?
I think it really depends on how the season goes. Obviously, if it doesn't go the way the staff wants it, you'll see a couple younger guys come in late in the season, mid-season, whatever it is. And then they'll try to get the young guys as many reps as possible to get them ready for the next season and so on. But I think Blackshear will hold that role as starter for the entire season. I think I could see Pacheco taking over as the number 2. But like I said before, Blackshear kind of goes out wide, hits the slot a couple times. So I think you could see Pacheco getting a lot more reps in the future.
What's the mindset of Rutgers coming into this game? The series obviously has been very, very one-sided, to put it gently. And since coming into the Big Ten, it's not been kind. I think last year was like 56-0, 58-0 the year before, 49-7. It's been very, very lopsided. So what kind of mindset do you think Rutgers has coming into this game?
I honestly think that just Rutgers has to compete. They just have to make it look competitive. As long as they look competitive, that's a plus in my book.
How do you see that? Do you see this team, this Rutgers team, building off the defensive performance? And I don't think anybody thinks Ohio State's going to score 77 points. But what do you think a realistic number is for Rutgers defensively to hold Ohio State in check on Saturday?
Honestly, we were actually just working on our predictions this morning. We're going to post them tomorrow on the night report, obviously. And then I think they'll be competitive. I really think Rutgers will hold them pretty close in the first half, and then as soon as the second half hits, I think you'll see the Ohio State offense come out with a force. So I'm going to go with, right now I have 49-14.
All right, Richie, that is Richie Schneiderite. You can catch him on Twitter at Richie S. Rivals, and, of course, you can read his work on thenightreport.net. Richie, thanks for taking some time to preview this game for us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, Zach Barnett joins us now of Football Scoop, and also he is a columnist for NBC's College Football Talk. Zach, real quick, before we get into some football, I happened to see your bio, and I'd seen this before and forgot to ask you about it the last time you were on the show with me. You're a Game of Thrones fan, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so I got to ask, what team are you on?
I think I'm on Team Danny. The great thing about that is it doesn't really give you any great options, but I'd like to see her win in the end.
Yeah, there were a lot of options until recently. Not to give away spoilers for those of you that haven't seen Game of Thrones, but there were more options before. But now it's kind of like with the final battles in focus. I think it's pretty obvious who most people have got to be siding with here. Down the stretch. It's just unfortunate we got to wait another year before we get to see the final 6 episodes.
Yeah, I like to. I don't know if you've read the books, but there's a guy on YouTube that really nerds out on the books. So whenever I get free time, I like to it'll take like 2 hours to digest a single chapter. So I like to get on there, and this guy thinks that in the books, the guy who's going to sit the Iron Throne in the end is Sweet Robin, Lysa Tully's little kid. So I don't know how we get there, but I think that would definitely be an interesting way to end up in the books. That's obviously not going to happen in the show.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I actually have not read the books. I started with the series. I'm going to go back and probably read the books after this is all done, but I haven't gotten around to starting them yet. So that'll have to probably be...
That's how I started. Was I watched season 1 and then I went back and read all the books before season 2, and it's definitely time consuming, but it's worth it. I wouldn't recommend picking it up till after Ohio State's done, though.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe make it a summer project for next year to get me amped up and ready for the last season. So, well, let's start.
Yeah, I'd recommend that.
Let's start with football. Not exciting necessarily as Game of Thrones. It definitely wasn't as cutthroat in Week 1 as you expect. Not a lot of great games. Ohio State was no exception. 77-31 win against Oregon State. What were your takeaways from that game? From what you saw?
Ohio State did about what I expected them to do. They would have had to totally fall apart for this to even be a competitive game with an Oregon State team that is going to be the worst team in the Pac-12 most likely this year. And the offense, Dwayne Haskins, 5 touchdowns, only 80 completions. I think he added a much needed dynamic to that offense. Weber and Dobbins were what they were. I think the only cause for concern if you're an Ohio State fan is that run defense, giving up nearly 200 yards, obviously 80 of them on one play. But that's your one cause for concern. Ryan Day, appears to be handling his double duty well, given that obviously they put up 77 points. Although we know, all of us knew going into this that the only question, for this 3-game suspension, the only real hurdle to jump is going to be that TCU game in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure we're going to find out a lot more about Ohio State even this week. Rutgers has an improved defense, but Ohio State's still probably going to score some points, and unless Rutgers puts up 31 on Ohio State, which is unlikely, I don't think we're even going to know how much better Ohio State has improved from Week 1 to Week 2 here, this week. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be, when you're in Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson, you essentially play a 3, 4, 5 game season. And so that season's not going to start until you get to TCU, which that's going to be an interesting game. TCU is another team that you're going to know absolutely nothing about going in, because they played Southern last week, and then they play SMU, who got torched by North Texas. They play them tomorrow night on Friday. So it's essentially going to be an unknown game for both of those teams. But TCU definitely has the ability to go to Jerry World and beat Ohio State if the Buckeyes don't play to their potential.
It was an interesting week one in the Big Ten. A lot of people went into this thinking Ohio State and Wisconsin, respectively, were probably the clear favorites in the division. I don't think either one did anything to dissuade us from that, especially with Michigan State struggling a lot with Utah State, Penn State struggling a bit with Appalachian State, needing the game-winning touchdown there in overtime, and then Michigan going down to Notre Dame. What were your thoughts seeing this Big Ten, especially the East side, playing out this weekend and some of those games I mentioned?
Yeah, we all expected the Big Ten East to be rival the SEC West in terms of depth, and obviously Michigan State and Penn State didn't play to their paper, but I think you're gonna withhold judgment on those teams until you get to at least week 2. Michigan State goes on the road to play at Arizona State at night, so that's going to be a tough test. And then Penn State goes to Pitt to play there. So if you're a coach, one of your favorite weeks in the season is in between week 1 and week 2, because now the rubber has hit the road. You can see what spots you really are good at and what you need to improve and how you can go about doing that. So I'm going to withhold judgment on both of those teams until we see what they do this weekend. Michigan, I'd like to withhold judgment, but they're a program that's had the same problems for many years now, even before Jim Harbaugh. That offensive line, still can't get fixed. That offense, it's to the point where if they had different coaching, you think that they could mask the problems they have up front a little bit better, but the style that Jim Harbaugh plays seems to, exacerbate his offensive line's own problems. And so, with that said, it's hard to imagine that Michigan, getting out of its own way to the point where they can compete with Ohio State and Wisconsin for the conference championship.
Yeah, we've talked about this here in Columbus a lot, as you can imagine. It's interesting for me because I feel like Michigan has a defense that could keep them in any game, and I don't feel any differently. Outside of that first quarter against Notre Dame, the defense did pretty well for Michigan, so they could be competitive. But the problem is with that schedule, it's hard to imagine them losing any less than at least 2 or 3 more games here. Because they've got so many tough games on their schedule. Like, I just don't feel like their offense sets up well enough to run the table and win any less than, maybe 9 or 10 games this year. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do, because if they lose 4 or 5 games this season, I don't know how the fan base up there and how the alumni, are going to approach that.
Yeah. I'm, live in Texas my whole life. I went to Texas. So obviously, the Texas-Oklahoma game is central to my college football experience, and so at the same time, I follow a lot of Ohio State people on Twitter and interact with a bunch of Buckeye fans on the internet, and I kind of get the same vibe for both of those rivalries that Ohio State fans and Oklahoma fans. You're never going to out and out root for your rival to win, and there's always a bit of joy in any time you see them lose, but at the same time, you're longing for the days when they could get their stuff together, because when the Texas-Oklahoma game matters, when the Ohio State-Michigan game matters, it feels like that's how college football is supposed to be. And Ohio State fans, Oklahoma fans, it's been so long since Texas and Michigan have been credible that you kind of long for them to be better so that game can matter again. And I'm sensing that a little bit at Ohio State. That you obviously you're never going to root for Michigan to beat Ohio State, but you'd like to at least fool yourself into thinking that could actually happen, that Michigan could actually, increase your heart rate, thinking that, we might lose to them this year. That you kind of long for that. So, Michigan's president came out this week and said that Jim Harbaugh's not on the hot seat, which is obviously step one to him being on the hot seat. He obviously has a 4-year contract, so I really don't think anything's going to happen this year or next year. But I think the biggest question is going to be if Michigan has another 8-4, 7-5 type season is, are they going to force wholesale offensive changes upon Jim Harbaugh? And, if so, how would he accept that? And then B, what's going to happen to the psyche of the Michigan fan base when you have your dream coach and it's still not working? You're going to have to ask, well, is this just who we are? Is this our lot in life at this point?
Yeah, that's a sobering thought for them. You mentioned growing up in Texas, and that's a perfect segue to the other situation I really wanted to touch on here before we got into some more national stuff. So Texas going down this week to Maryland. Texas had a fair number of expectations, a little bit of hype for this season. I think there was some optimism down there in Austin that they would get the season going and Tom Herman would have that program finally rolling. But that first game against Maryland is kind of a sobering thought for the Texas fan base. What's your take on that program as it sits right now? Now 0-1 after week one.
I think it's fair at this point to hit the panic button because the problems that you had against Maryland were the exact same problems that they had last year. Slow starts, defensive breakdowns, and then you crawl back in the game, and then you take the lead, and then you completely give it away in the fourth quarter. They went 1-4 last year in one-score games, and in 3 of those games, they were undone by late Sam Ehlinger turnovers. And then the fourth game was the Oklahoma game where they, fell down early, came back, took the lead, then gave back the lead, and then they had a chance to come back and win the game late. And Ehlinger threw the ball away on 4th down and a 4th and 10. He threw it out of bounds like it was, a 1st and 10 play. So, and then you saw that exact same situation pretty much play out against Maryland. And so they couldn't run the ball. They didn't have a real offensive identity. So, Texas at this point is all in on Tom Herman. So if this season plays out like last season did, then it's going to be the same situation that I laid out in Michigan. It's going to be, will Herman, replace Tim Beck as his offensive coordinator? There's already a report that he took over play calling after the first quarter of the Maryland game, which he did the same thing in the bowl game last year against Missouri. So, if that's the case, then why is Tim Beck still the offensive coordinator? Texas saw the exact same scenarios play out with Charlie Strong when he hired Sean Watson, brought him back for no reason after year 1, and then he had to fire him 1 game into year 2, and then he was out of a job a year later. So it's a lot of history repeating itself, and a lot of people are asking themselves, why can't we wake up from this nightmare? And there's really not one good answer unless it's just to go out and play better and beat somebody.
I feel like at times, and I'm curious your opinion on this, if this matters in the eyes of maybe the Texas administration or fans. Herman at times has been his own worst enemy, and he's been very confrontational, very defensive about certain things. And, he just comes across almost as patronizing when he explains, like he talks about, you can't see the progress, but it's there. And I don't know, it just feels like he can be his own worst enemy. Do you think that is going to matter when it comes time to whether, to keep Herman as, as their long-term answer or move on from him? Do you think that is going to hurt him in their eyes?
Oh, yeah, I think it's already hurting him. He was mocked after the game for saying, I see all sorts of progress, and, if you can't see it, well, I can see it. When, ultimately football is a result of business, and progress, results in a W, not an L. So, and then he, his comments that's been making the rounds this week is about how, comparing, the loss to the Texas team to the Lenny character from Of Mice and Men. And the reason they lost the game is because they wanted to win too bad. Well, and that's why they fell behind 24-7 in the second quarter. Well, I'm pretty sure Maryland wanted to win. I don't think you lost because you wanted to win too bad. They looked out of place. They looked slow. And then they weren't as well prepared as Maryland. And at the end, they did make some good decisions. Maryland, I mean, they got outplayed and outcoached, and that's the reality of it. Not that they wanted to win too badly.
So on a national level, I want to get your read on the Alabama situation. I know, Nick Saban was asked about his quarterback's performance at the end of that game against Louisville, and he kind of snapped back about just the question in general, and he's obviously feeling the pressure to make a decision. But I'm really honestly curious, and this isn't, from a critical standpoint, I'm curious why he hasn't named Tua Tagovailoa the obvious starter. It feels like everybody in the world can see that Alabama is better with him at quarterback. What's your opinion on why he hasn't made that choice, and will he, maybe this next week?
I don't really have a great answer as to why he's done it because, he snapped at Maria Taylor for, he perceived it an insulting question to Jalen Hurts. I think it insults Jalen Hurts' intelligence to not come out and just name Tua the starter. In the one time that Jalen Hurts spoke to the media in preseason, he made some news by, saying that the coaches hadn't talked to him, they haven't discussed this with him, and that the writing was on the wall, from the spring. I mean, the writing was on the wall when, that rainbow landed in Devontae Smith's hands to win the national championship. It's Tua's job at this point. Everybody knows it. Everybody wants to admit it, except Nick Saban. And then, the obvious answer is that he doesn't want Jalen Hurts to transfer. Well, Jalen Hurts is only 15 hours away from graduating, so he's committed. He committed in preseason to stay here because it's in his best interest at this point. Obviously, we're one game into the season, but he's going to graduate in December, and then he'll be free to leave and play immediately somewhere else. So I think one of the storylines to follow this season is going to be how many games that he plays in, because if Tua gets hurt and he breaks his ankle out for the season, game one of Arkansas State, then there's nothing you can do about that. But Hurts played mop-up duty against Louisville. How many games is he going to play mop-up duty when Alabama's up 30, when you could go to Mac Jones, your third-string guy, to run out the clock instead of Jalen? Because if he plays in 5 games and he he burns one of his 2 remaining seasons on mop-up duty, then that's going to be a extremely bad look for Nick Saban. So how Nick Saban, balances that to potentially allow Jalen to, use this year as a red shirt with a new rule and then transfer elsewhere if he chooses to do that as a junior instead of a senior, I think is going to be, a fun subplot to follow this year.
So a couple of last quick questions here before I let you go. First, I want to ask you about the Clemson-Texas A&M game. I'm really looking forward to this game, first big game of the new era there in Texas A&M, and we won't even get into all the drama with Florida State, the Florida State transfer and everything. But I do want to ask you about this game. How do you see this game playing out, Clemson going on the road to College Station?
I think it's going to be, I give A&M a puncher's chance to win this game outright. They're going to be extremely loose. They're going to feel like they have nothing to lose because, they're 2 touchdown underdogs, I think. And if they keep it close, it's going to feel like a moral victory because they're not expected to win and they're at home. It's going to be just kind of an Aggie family reunion to celebrate the beginning of the Jimbo era and all the SEC national championships that are to come. Whereas Clemson, if they don't go 13-0, then this regular season is going to be viewed as a failure. So all the pressure is going to be on Clemson. Their quarterback situation, is unsettled until it's settled. I and most people think that Dabo is just waiting to hand the baton to Trevor Lawrence as soon as Kelly Bryant gives him an opportunity to do so. So I think A&M has the ability to make Clemson uncomfortable, to keep this game, keep this a 1-score game going into the fourth quarter. And then it's going to be really interesting to see, if it's a 3-point game, with 8 minutes left, who does and say Clemson's punted the last 2 times. Who does Dabo really want to hand the ball to, for his first, real pressure drive of the situation? So I think A&M has a puncher's chance, and I think it's going to be fascinating theater.
And last question I want to ask you about, Zach. So Oklahoma, Kyler Murray looked sensational in Week 1 against Florida International. Oklahoma looked really good. Are they legit?
Yeah, I think so. Everyone expected Oklahoma to put up points on Florida Atlantic, and they did that. But the defense to hold an FAU offense that was just mauling people to basically shut them out while the starters were in. That shows real progress, real development under Mike Stoops. Their offense is obviously going to be different without Baker Mayfield, but it has the potential to be just as good because everything else around Kyler Murray is better. And then obviously Kyler is, he's an accurate passer, and I think he's completed over 70% of his passes for his career. And then he's an extremely slippery guy, fast agile guy to account for in the running game. So I think Oklahoma, played their way back into, I think, that top 5 conversation along with Ohio State, Wisconsin, Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson.
Yeah, I have to correct myself. I said Florida International. I meant to say Florida Atlantic. But Oklahoma, a 30-point favorite over UCLA this week, which is it goes to show the uphill climb that Chip Kelly has getting that program turned around after a Week 1 loss against Cincinnati. So that'll be interesting, but Oklahoma definitely looks like the real deal. Zach Barnett, you can catch him on Football Scoop and also NBC's College Football Talk. You can catch him on Twitter at Zach_Barnett. Zach, I appreciate you taking the time to catch us up with College Football Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Stretch run time here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Time now for the Buckeye Beat segment. That means here on Friday, as it is today, we are going to get into your hashtag unscripted mail questions. We'll get to that in just 1 second. I would like to remind you, the Unscripted Ohio podcast is on Buckeye Grove on Monday and Fridays, the unscripted mail segment specifically on Friday. You can find, follow, and subscribe to Unscripted Ohio by searching on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. Please rate and review. Leave your comments and well wishes for the podcast as we continue to do everything we can to grow the podcast and be as successful. So make sure you rate and review on the medium of your choice. So the unscripted mail segment, as I mentioned, a new segment that we debuted last week. You can tweet me your questions for the unscripted mail by including the hashtag unscripted mail and give me your questions or comments on Twitter. You can catch me on there at KYLam8. You can also email your questions at kyle@buckeyegrove.com. So please feel free to give me your questions for next week on the unscripted mail segment. Just include the hashtag unscripted mail. So our first question comes by email from Bill. He asked how I would rate the linebackers in Week 1 against Oregon State. Bill, I got to say, I think as a whole, I think I would give the linebackers a C- rating. I think Pete Warner was excellent in run coverage. Malik Harrison was good, both in run and pass. I think Warner struggled a little bit against the pass. Now, your specific question from Bill was, is Baron Browning a true inside linebacker? I touched on this earlier in the show. I think Browning struggles still a little bit with the mental aspect of the game and recognition. I think he has the physical tools to be an inside linebacker. I'm still not sold about him as the game is coming to him. I'm not sure he's reacting. I think he's still in the slow thought process, seeing plays develop, and I don't think he's just able to react and let his instincts cover. So I'm not going to say Browning is not an inside linebacker. I thought he was substandard against Oregon State. I thought Pete Warner was good on the run, was okay against the pass. I thought Malik Harrison played a solid game overall. So I'm going to give the overall linebacking core a C- for week number 1 against Oregon State. Our next question coming from Raquel on Twitter. She asked me, will Dwayne Haskins beat out Joe Germain's single-season passing record? I got to say, I did look at this. Joe Germain, his passing record, 1998, set at 3,330 yards. I gotta say, I really think that Dwayne Haskins is going to beat that. If Ohio State plays 13 games, and that does not include the bowl game, which would count toward his single-season passing record. But if they play 13 games by getting to the Big Ten championship, then he would need just around 250 yards a game to set that record. So I got to say, my answer to this question is yes, absolutely. I think Dwayne Haskins will set the Ohio State single-season passing record with a little over 3,300 yards. I actually expect him to wind up getting to roughly 3,500 plus yards this season. Next question, Buckeye Steve at S. Matthews 19 asks, who is calling the offensive plays, Wilson from the booth or Day from the sidelines? Yes. Actually, Steve, to be more specific, I would say Wilson is calling the plays like usual from the booth, but like Urban, I would say Ryan Day also has his own input on each play that it's called, and he has the overriding ability. if he so chooses. I think in this case, I really think it's a coordinated effort. I think the plays are coming from Kevin Wilson. That is my understanding. But I think Ryan Day gives his input and will sometimes discuss it when he has an issue or when he sees a problem. But I think Kevin Wilson is making the play calls. I think one of the reasons we did not see a lot of slow plays or situations where we had almost delay of game penalties on Saturday is I think Kevin Wilson is getting the play in. They're going with tempo. And I think Ryan Day right now is trusting Kevin Wilson to make that play call. I know some will take that as a criticism of Urban Meyer. We know Urban is very hands-on with the offense. I think in this situation, I think Kevin Wilson is he's done this a long time. He's very good at calling plays. I think Ryan Day is trusting him for the most part to use his best judgment and make the calls for Ohio State. So I think it's a working recipe. I hope when Urban gets back, whatever rhythm they have with calling the plays, I hope Urban will let that continue. And the last question of the day for the unscripted mail segment comes from Ezekiel. Will Kyle Young make a big leap this year? That is, of course, a basketball question. He is referring to 6'8" sophomore forward Kyle Young from Massillon, Ohio. Ezekiel, I think Kyle will make a big leap this year. I don't think necessarily it's wise to expect him to score a lot of points. I don't think that's going to be his role this year. I think he is capable of that maybe next year or the year after. I think this year, though, you're going to see him be a consistent rebounder, a very good, solid defensive player, an all-around versatile guy that does a lot of the little things for Ohio State. I think the scoring will come. I think he's going to have some games where he scores 15, 18 points. But I think overall his game will definitely improve this year. I think he's going to have a lot more confidence. I'm just not sure it'll necessarily manifest itself in the scoring, especially early on in the season. But I do think better days lie ahead for Kyle Young. So that will wrap things up for the unscripted mail segment as well as the Buckeye Beat. Again, please rate, review us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, or Stitcher, your medium of choice. You can catch us Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. We will be back Monday. I am very excited to tell you Kirk Barton will be the guest co-host as he is back as a staff member to BuckeyeGrove.com. So former Ohio State captain and offensive lineman Kirk Barton will co-host the show on Monday. We will have Ross Fulton, of course, back as he is going to be every Monday to break down the previous game, which would be Ohio State and Rutgers from Saturday. So stay tuned as Kirk and I take away the Unscripted Ohio podcast on Monday, and we'll be back to break down everything from the weekend in college football, including Ohio State and Rutgers. Join us again on Monday, everybody. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, and go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.